And I do have Bethany Sonefeld, the design lead at IBM Design, who will talk to us about creating and maintaining a design system for 130 teams. Go ahead, Bethany, it's all yours.
Awesome. Thanks so much for the introduction. And thank you all for joining today. Not sure what time zones y'all are in, but if it's during your lunch hour, really appreciate you joining in today to listen to me talk about really the story behind Carbon and how we've grown it since its infancy 2 years ago when we first started. Today I'm presenting from Austin, Texas, and like she said, I'm the design lead for the Carbon design system. So yeah, really excited to come share with y'all today. And as some of you may know, IBM's going through a pretty big design transformation across the company right now that's spreading across the organization, and it's really exciting. Really the mission behind IBM Design is to create a sustainable culture of design within IBM. And so what that looks like is hiring a lot of new fresh faces to the tech scene. We're bringing in a lot of new recently graduated students from college, and what we do is all go through a 3-month design camp program where we use design thinking as a platform for how to design experiences within IBM. So what's really exciting about that is that we're really utilizing the different tools that IBM provides for us as a framework for not only problem solving, but really to design for business enterprise software, which is not something that's super familiar to a lot of people. And a little bit of background into the product that I work on and where we got started with Carbon. So Carbon is the design system for IBM Cloud products. And IBM Cloud has grown quite immensely since it was first launched, but essentially it started as a platform as a service, place for web and mobile developers to host their applications. They can integrate different service offerings from our catalog and really use that to scale up their different applications. And so if we look at kind of the timeline of what IBM Cloud has been through since we first launched, you can see that it was about 2 years later until we actually implemented a design team in place, design systems team in place. And so we ran into quite a few small problems, most of them being around the challenge of scale. And so our catalog had gone from 30 services when we first launched, and those services can range from APIs or different mobile integrations that you can use in your app. And each of those services has a team attached to it. So we went from 30 to 75 a few months later to 200 where we are today. And what that looks like is you can see really how our catalog has grown since we first launched in February of 2014 compared to today where we're at, containing a variety of infrastructure offerings as well as different microservices. So we've grown quite immensely since then. And at the time, a 30-page style guide existed, I believe, where it was just a PDF containing basic design guidance and quickly got passed around. And as some of you may know, PDFs quickly become super outdated because there's no single source of truth for that, where it can continue to get updated and out of sync quite easily. There was also no code base that coded component library that we could pull from at the time. So our engineering and development teams were sort of left in the dark. And what that looks like was really this expectation versus reality world where we were running into a lot of things where the core design team would say one thing and say, okay, the buttons should be this color and this size, but yet our service teams that were contributing UI to our platform, it really wasn't hitting home with them, and we realized it was a broken process and we needed to fix it. So what you can see here is just a few inconsistencies that were aligned around the product. So different tab structures here, all containing different visual styles to them. We have 3 different buttons on this page that have different text weights, different colors. So clearly a lot of minor inconsistencies across the platform. And we realized that with hundreds of designers and developers contributing to the product, we really needed just a single source of truth for consistency and cohesion. And that's really where Carbon was born and where we aligned around the idea of creating a design system that would be the single source of truth. And how I like to talk about Carbon is sort of equating it to a human life cycle since I've been on the team since we first launched and since we first started working on the design system, I really have been able to see it grow from just its toddler years to kind of where we are today, where we're growing old and wise. And then the next step is not dying. It's more like enlightenment and kind of being the tell-all for everything. So the way I'm going to talk about the different big versions of Carbon is really equating them to a human life cycle. So starting off with that, back to our toddler years where we were just kind of like learning how to walk, really figuring out what it meant to build a design system. And this was around March of 2016. So keep in mind that's 2 years after the product IBM Cloud had launched publicly. And so what that looked like in terms of team structure is we had a team of 10, and you can see here pretty split evenly between front-end developers and designers. And that's definitely something that has lended to our success, I feel, is that we've always put a big focus on integrating the two and making those work streams very collaborative, never working in a silo. I think something that's also unique to our team is that we're a team comprised of a lot of women, and so I felt really empowered to work with a lot of different smart people on my team, and that's something that has been amazing. What we did first to kind of kick off and figure out the direction that we wanted to go in was we did a big product audit of IBM Cloud at the time, and so we were able to outline different components that we felt would be a good starting point for us. So you can see here, there's some form elements, there's buttons, content switcher, and links, all of those real foundational elements that we wanted to start with as our main framework. And then after that, our team did a huge design thinking workshop, really just trying to understand what the current workflow looked like for product designers and product developers that were contributing UI to our platform. So we outlined really what the as-is scenario looked like. Since we had a wide variety of development teams that we were catering the design systems toward, we really had to do some empathy maps to understand what that persona looked like. And then lastly, we aligned around a common set of deliverables that we wanted moving forward to really push towards for our first big release. And this is sort of the hill that we aligned on. So IBM refers to hills as like your guiding principle moving forward. And so our hill was an IBM Offering Team can discover, understand, and use the design system to independently build their IBM Cloud approved experience. I know that's kind of a mouthful, but what that really means is that we wanted teams to feel confident that they were contributing UI to the platform that was really consistent with what already existed. And we didn't want the system to be a lot of hand-holding. We wanted them to be able to do it on their own and really enable them to do it independently. So where did we start? We really hit the ground running, and we're running in an agile environment. And so what that means is we used 2-week sprints to essentially move forward with different designs and different developments. And like I said earlier, since our team was split pretty evenly between design and development, it was really crucial for us for them to work in tandem. So we'd pair design often and make sure things were in sync and moving forward. And what we really wanted to ship for our first big release was 3 main deliverables. So we focused around creating a sketch kit and a Bluemix component library, which was our code base, and then also a website at that time. Now keep in mind, back then during our first toddler years and our first version, we were named the Bluemix design system instead of the Carbon design system. And that's because we were really focused on the product at the time, which that also has gone through a name change. It's now IBM Cloud, but at the time it was IBM Bluemix. So very product focused, very focused on creating assets for just one product at the time. And secondly, we're kind of moving forward towards our teenage years and really kind of doing a lot of fun stuff, because once you build a design system, you're adding onto it, you're adding new components and really trying to figure out what the direction that you're going in. And so this was around March 2017, about 8 months later. Now keep in mind, we jumped to version 6 for our first big release. We did have a few smaller beta releases prior to that, but we didn't feel that they were stable enough for people to start using them. And so that's why we kind of started with a higher version number. And so if we're looking at version 7, this was focused around 4 different things. One of them, we wanted to open source the system at this time and really allow a few different teams to utilize us. Secondly, we did a big component refactor on our vanilla library. And what refactoring means is you're basically improving your code, making it more maintainable and more stable. On the theme of that, we also refactored our documentation website. So we rebuilt it as a React app. And then fourth, this is when we rebranded ourselves to Carbon. So just some pro tips that I'm going to be sprinkling out throughout this presentation. This is sort of like things that we learned along the way that we didn't necessarily know starting off. And so I really hope that you guys will take away from this and be able to implement it, because this is like mistakes that we made that we've now learned from. And one of those being, definitely publish your roadmap early. Something that we didn't do with our version 6 library, our first big release, was that we didn't do enough outreach for that version. And so we ran into some engineering teams that had hesitation because they weren't involved in the process of knowing what was coming next. So I'd really highly recommend that you get your roadmap out. We publish it as like just a GitHub issue, and we ask for people's feedback, and we share with them like what we're working on in the next upcoming months. So going back to version 7, some of the big things that we focused on, one was open sourcing, and this was a huge win for our team, mainly because IBM's a culture that's very patent focused, and with Carbon, we wanted to make it a little bit different and really try to change the mindset within IBM. We were trying to create a little open source community within this huge organization. And what that looked like for us was starting with a design system. And so you can see we were able to get our open source approval about a month before we released, which was pretty exciting. You can all see that we're like celebrating here. And then secondly, we did some refactors around our component library, our vanilla.js library at the time. So we had gotten some feedback on the design system that some of our elements were not in sync and some of them were inconsistent. So for example, we had something in the kit that wasn't necessarily in code yet. And moving forward, we wanted to really squash that mindset and have all of our assets be aligned. And so what we did to really help with that effort was we created a new pull request process where 2 designers and 2 developers would have to review each refactored component. So let's say I worked on the text area, for example. I would be able to look at it in code, see what was changed, and see if it's actually accurate with what we have in the design kit. And you can see here from our one component that was refactored, we removed like over 1,000 lines of code. And so it really involves a lot of decreasing old crufty code and getting rid of things that you really don't need anymore. As a whole, our compiled CSS saw a decrease of 83%, and our compiled JavaScript saw a 73% decrease from version 6 to version 7. So although there was a lot of breaking changes involved with this release, we felt that it was absolutely crucial moving forward that we had the most stable code base that we could get. And then again, along the theme of refactoring, we refactored our documentation website. And this was really pioneered by one of our senior front-end developers, Mari Johannesson. She focused on rebuilding the website as a React app, and that has immensely helped improve our performance. Again, we cleaned up a lot of the code and made it more maintainable so that other people that could jump in and make changes to the design system website were able to know where to go to make those changes. And one thing we implemented, which I'm really proud of that we still do today, is we implemented a markdown parser, which basically enables designers to feel confident writing content for the website, and it would be automatically translated and styled the way that we envision. And again, Mari had gone in and really made it possible for our designers to feel confident doing this. So she styled things a certain way. You can see here like our tables or our charts get translated to a specific look and feel that we're going for, so that not only is everything systematic and consistent, but we don't have to rely on front-end development to implement those changes for us. And lastly, we rebranded ourselves to the Carbon design system versus the Bluemix design system. At this time, again, equating it back to those like teenage years of your life, we were really beginning to become our own product essentially, and we were breaking off from our parent brand. We also had teams outside of just IBM Bluemix, IBM Cloud, who were interested in using the design system. So other product teams within IBM had asked, hey, I'd love to use your system, but it's named the Bluemix design system. So I'm like really confused, you know, if it's for me or not, or if it's a company-wide initiative. And so what we really wanted to do was just kind of break away from our parent brand. You can really see the difference here in our first version that we got out the door, version 6, and then version 7, where a lot cleaner, a lot more robust, especially since we focused on refactoring and making our code base absolutely as stable as it could be. All right, so next, we're kind of in the phase of like adulting, where we're really figuring out like getting our shit together and growing and maturing. And this was around May of 2017, so a few months later. And I feel like the expectation is you build a design system and all the hard work is done, and it's all like sunshine and rainbows from there. But in reality, you're putting out a lot of small fires, because as adoption increases, the amount of bug fixes increases, the amount of outreach increases. And so just keep that in mind, that like there's still a lot of work to be done in terms of maintaining a design system. So here's a few necessary steps that the Carbon team has taken to really help maintain the system to be what it is today. One of those being contribution guidelines. And to be honest, this is something that we're still trying to figure out today, is how can we create a culture within IBM that's comfortable contributing design patterns and code as well. I feel like the dev community has a great culture of open source, and we're trying to bring that in here and spread it across design as well. And contributing really helps to offload the team from your work. So you can have front-end developers that are contributing PRs to fix bugs, and it's really taking a lot of the effort off of your core team. Having a code of conduct in place is something that we didn't have at first, and it really helps us to basically outline what are the general best practices for communicating with your team. For an example, I think we have 3 Slack channels, and I think one of them has about 600 members. And so we had people hearing like questions at us or channeling. That's not great, because it can interrupt people in different time zones and interrupt their sleep. And trust me, no one likes their sleep to be interrupted. So having a code of conduct in place has really helped everyone to align on like best practices for communicating with us. And then documentation is another huge one. I cannot stress this enough. We didn't do this at first with version 6, and version 7 is really focused on ramping up our documentation, because trust me, someone's going to have a question about something that you never thought they would question. And the more that you can like help to write out and really guide people on how to use your system and just FAQs, the more questions that you're having to, or the less questions you're having to answer. And I think our mantra on the Carbon team is just like, it's better to have way too much documentation than too little. Our documentation is also spread out across code, UX, and visual patterns. So you can see on our website how each component page has a code tab, a usage tab, and a style tab. So what we really, really focus on is providing documentation around all of the aspects of design. And so a UX designer is able to go in there and learn about the code, and vice versa. A front-end developer can go in and learn, when do I use a button versus a link, or any of those sort of best practices for using the system. Another pro tip that I would recommend, like, be prepared to answer a ton of questions. Some people have a lot of questions about using the system, which is great, because that means your adoption's ramping up. But I guarantee you, like, someone will have a question about something that you're probably like, oh, I'm not sure if I know the answer to that. So I just would recommend making sure you have a strong decision for whatever, or a strong reason for any decisions that you've made across the system. So for example, like, we get questions about our icon library, or, you know, why did we choose using vanilla over Angular? Make sure that you're confident in why you made those decisions. Consequences of updates. This comes along with being a systems thinker. where you're really kind of thinking about how all of the assets and deliverables in your system are connected and related to each other, and any change that you make across one element should be reflected across the others. And keep in mind that it's sometimes a lot of manual work for people to go in and make those changes. So for example, we recently updated our typeface across the board, and our visual designer and I had to go through each of our static images on the website and change out the typeface. So that was a lot of manual work on our end that we needed to make sure that like all of our assets were aligned and consistent. Another pro tip, be sure to focus on allocating time just to fix bugs. This isn't something that we did until recently, honestly, where we just kind of say, oh, we have these bugs to fix, you can get to them sometime in your sprint. But what has really helped us to tackle those is to allocate specific points per sprint for someone to fix bugs. And it may not always be the most fun thing, but I think it's really helped in maintaining our system. And definitely, again, encourage outside contributors to submit PRs to fix bugs. Something that's helped us in growing the system is we've really increased our outreach over the past few months. So we have Carbon component check-ins, which are bi-weekly meetings with all of our sponsor users, which is mainly IBM Cloud designers and developers. And so we're really focused on using that time to not only share out what we're working on and what's up and coming in our roadmap, but really try to gain an understanding of how product designers are using the system, and if there's any components that they don't have that we could potentially help build for them. That's always something we're opening the lines of communication for. I could watch this GIF on repeat like all day. At this point, like we pretty much got our shit together, where we're like feeling good about the library and the system as a whole. And ultimately, like we feel like we have our processes in place and we're feeling very mature. So now we're kind of in the phase where we're like middle-aged and focusing on the next biggest version of Carbon, and that was around version 8. So that was in October of 2017. And keep in mind, our version numbers are pretty much 6 to 8 months apart, and that was due to us really promising our engineering teams and development teams that we wouldn't ship breaking changes for at least that amount of time. Again, we didn't do that at first, and we had quite a few angry people that were like, you know, there's breaking changes every 2 weeks. We can't really accommodate that with our schedules. And so that's another thing I would recommend, is to definitely plan out your releases and make sure that they have a reason for being breaking. So what is version 8 focused around? It was focused around a lot of, I would say, more visual aspects of things. So another thing was scaling us across IBM. So we focused on the concept of add-ons. We did a big refactor of our design kit templates. We implemented a new typeface across the board. And lastly, we did a big website visual refresh where we really focused on enhancing what the Carbon brand looked like. So what are add-ons? Add-ons is a concept where you're really removing product-specific components from your library. And remember in the beginning when I said that we did a big product audit and basically like pulled all those elements from the product? In retrospective, that probably wasn't the smartest idea, because if we were going to scale across multiple product teams, then we couldn't have product-specific components. So you can see here, like our cards, for example, were very much built for IBM Cloud. And when we had other teams come in and say, I'm really interested in using the system, but this component doesn't work for me. So what we really did to combat that was pull out those product-specific components and make them part of our add-ons library, where the core Carbon library can continue to focus on those globalized components. And again, along that theme of really removing ourselves from product-specific things, we had templates in our kit that reflected what we thought was in product, but in reality, they quickly became outdated, and it was very tough to keep them up to sync, especially since our team didn't really own that macro UX experience. And so what we did was we pulled out those product-specific templates, and we provided really a set of generic templates that show best practices in layout, using the components together, and really just showcasing how all the elements can be combined to make layouts. We also did a big introduction on version 8 with a new typeface. So IBM Plex is a custom design typeface that was built for IBM. And so we were really happy to adopt it and really excited to get it into the component library. You can see here really the difference between Helvetica and IBM Plex, where Plex has given us our own distinct personality that makes us look and feel more like IBM. So while version 7 was focused around a lot of code updates and making sure our code base was stable, I really wanted version 8 to be focused around making sure our visual style was going to be timeless as well. And so what we did was we looked at our homepage, we did a big kind of general overview of what we could be improving on. And our visual designers went through a big overhaul. It was like a 3 to 4 month design overhaul where we really looked at adding in different carbon word marks, what the system looks like across multiple set of deliverables, and really focus on the carbon brand moving forward. So you can see here really the difference in our different big version numbers, where version 6 was very product focused and really getting something out the door at first. Honestly, it's kind of like looking back at your old high school or college projects, because you're kind of like, it's so near and dear to your heart, but at the same time, you're like kind of cringeworthy. And so you can see how we've evolved and how we've continued to grow to become where we are today. Now we're sort of in the phase of growing old and wise and really focusing on how we can continue to innovate with a system that's still being maintained, but we still are interested in growing it. So this is kind of what I would equate us to today, where we're feeling pretty good and we're really excited that our adoption is ramping up. And we're now focused on our 4th biggest release, which is version 9 of Carbon, and that's slated for May of this year. So definitely stay tuned for more to come, and hopefully you'll be excited as we are. So lastly, I just want to leave with some key takeaways and different tips that I feel like I've learned along the way that I want to share out with y'all so that you can take these away, and whether you work on a design system or not, I feel like these can equate to you. So if you're in the building phase, I would highly recommend starting small, and please, please promise me you'll focus on accessibility first, because it's really important. And at IBM, we have great accessibility resources, so we're very lucky in that sense. But focus on those small elements. Focus on colors, type, grid, icons, getting those things set into place so that you have that foundational element to build off of. Secondly, I would recommend building a diverse team, not only in skill sets, but also in different ages, races, anything. Like really focus on thinking about diversity just outside of the box. And we have people on our team who are so incredibly smart that I learn from every day. And I feel like everyone has their own special skill set, which I've really been able to lean off of them for. And then lastly, focus on your most valuable product. What are you trying to get out the door for your design system? And how can you get something out the door and begin testing it with people to really understand their usage of the system? If you're in the growing phase of your design system, try to anticipate what your product's needs are. That's what Carbon has done with our component check-ins, where we're really increasing our outreach to teams and really trying to understand what the product's needs are so that we can fit our roadmap into theirs. Definitely plan for refactors. I think this is something that's kind of inevitable, to be honest, because you can't expect to get everything perfect the first go. And with us, the refactor that we did with version 7 has really helped to make us a lasting design system and really made our code base very stable. And lastly, for maintaining your design system, highly recommend ramping up your documentation so that it's literally a link you can point someone to if they have questions about anything. Encourage your outside contributors. So again, we're still trying to do this today, trying to build a small community within IBM and really ramp up that contribution model. Dedicate time to just fix bugs. Again, I know it's not always the most exciting thing, but I promise you it will be rewarding in the end. But lastly, don't forget to make time to build and innovate. I feel like in today's world, it's very easy to do the status quo. And so my methodology is always to try and push our team to do the best work that we can and really think outside of the box. Thank you guys so much for listening. I'm really happy to take questions, and you can also tweet Carbon or myself or email us. We're always happy to chat.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much for a great presentation, Bethany. We have a lot of questions coming in here, and we'll try to get through as many of them as we can, but we are a little constrained on time. So let's get started. So somebody was asking whether or not the Carbon Design System's only task was to develop the design system, or did you have any other objectives as well, since the design system seems to have been developed so quickly? Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. So that was our main goal once we had a team formed. I will say that we had a set of developers that were working part-time on a style guide / component library, as well as designers from the product teams that were working on that. But it was really piecemeal, and since no one was dedicated to it 100%, we found that no work was getting moved along as fast as it should be. And so once we were able to have a team dedicated full-time, that was really our main objective moving forward, was to build out and increase our adoption across IBM Cloud.
Okay, and kind of as a follow-up to that, right now, is maintaining the design system still your main task, or are you working on anything else?
We're working on lots of things, so stay tuned, but maintaining will always be part of your design system once you have it out the door. And I think that's part of what we were challenged with in the beginning, where we didn't really know what our next steps were. And so I would continue to think about innovating and what you can do to be better, whether that's doing, audits on your products, like how, your colors or whatever that is. That may include like going back and redoing stuff, but don't be afraid to do that. I think part of maintaining always comes with innovating and continuing to build off of what you already have.
Great, thank you. So at the beginning of your presentation, you mentioned running a design thinking workshop to ideate around the workflow. Can you tell us who was involved in that process and what roles?
Sure, absolutely. So once every designer and developer that's hired into IBM Design, we go through that design camp in the beginning when we're first hired, and we really learn how design thinking practices such as empathy mapping, as is journey mapping, those different tools that help us to really kick off a project. So that's what we did within Carbon, where we had our team of 10, so that was spread across 5 front-end developers and 4 designers and 1 design manager. So we were able to really outline the workflow and what we thought it was moving forward, or what we thought it was, so we could continue to improve that workflow. And after that, it really set the foundation for us moving forward so we can continue to test those things.
Okay, great. So we all know that things always change really quickly. How do you communicate those design changes across the teams? And also, in addition to that, various people have different suggestions and point of views for components or designs. How do you decide whether to go ahead with this design or component or something else? How do you make that decision?
Yeah, that's a great question, because it's really tricky for us as a core Carbon team, because we want our product designers' input as much as possible, because there were times that we worked in a silo and the Carbon team would build something out and then release it. And then we realized we got feedback that it doesn't really work in product. It doesn't work for all of the use cases that we accounted for. So I would highly recommend talking to your teams that are actually using the system and get their input, get their feedback, make them a part of your creative process. Don't make it like an us versus them sort of situation, because then, we never wanted to mandate Carbon to be used, or we never wanted to enforce people to use the system. We more or less want to enable them to contribute to the platform and contribute to IBM Cloud. And so in terms of making design decisions, it's never one person that's like, yes, let's go with that. Like 100%, we're not going with this direction. It's very much like a collaborative effort between the Carbon team and our developers. We lean on them a lot for different technical limitations, but then also leaning on our product designers throughout IBM Cloud to really get their input. I think we know something's done when we've gone through a ton of rigorous testing to ensure that it's going to fit for the most amount of use cases that we can plan for.
Okay, great. So we also have a question about the information architecture of your site. How did you decide on the labeling and grouping of the components? How did your team first approach it?
Yeah, so I think initially, actually with version 6, we had more of an atomic design structure where it was like base elements and then components. And to us, we thought about it at first and we thought it sounded like a good idea, but it didn't make sense for our product team's needs. There were a lot of people confused with, why they were separated out and really didn't understand the atomic design methodology. So for version 7, we focused on making it just literally components all in one. To us, alphabetical order was the easiest way for users to find what they were looking for. Since our library is getting quite big, you'll see things like data viz that have been condensed into one like little section. It's like a grandchild, I guess, of that component section because it's like a nested thing. I think in the future, if we continue to build out like different variations of components, we will introduce that structure again. But for us, alphabetical made the most sense.
It makes sense. And in terms of working across teams and levels, how close did your team had or has to work with C-level? And what is the hardest thing then when you're starting to get the team together?
C-level, I'm not familiar with that.
Like C-level executives,
Okay.
like the top level in the company. Did you run into any issues working across teams and levels within the company, and how did you approach them?
To be honest, we didn't run into a lot of issues, and I think that was really because we got lucky with our design manager and the manager above her were really invested in just allowing the Carbon team to build what we thought was most valuable. They put a lot of trust in us in the beginning. And so there wasn't a lot of us having to quote unquote sell the design system because the executives were aware of all of the inconsistencies across the product. They knew that our catalog would continue to grow and continue to scale, where it is today to 200 services. And so it was sort of a no-brainer that a design system needed to be implemented. And I realize that's not the reality of a lot of people, but for us, we got lucky in the sense that we were able to just hit the ground running and start building. If that's not the case for you or your company, definitely do things like a product audit, a screenshot audit to show like where the inconsistencies lie within your product and why that can essentially hurt end users. That's something that will definitely provide value to building a design system.
Sure, makes sense. On the opposite end of the spectrum, do you have any suggestions or ideas for smaller companies with very limited resources? If they're stuck in the infancy stage, do you know how they can help push beyond this current phase with constraints of limited resources?
Yeah, absolutely. I would recommend, since there's so many design system resources out there that are open source, try to lean on those. If you don't have developers, then see if you can use a framework and start building off of that. Try and teach yourself CSS or Sass so you can learn how to manipulate certain look and feel to a component. Again, don't get so stressed out about like building a huge grand component library at first. Like just get some of the foundational elements out there. Start with your colors, start with your typography and your grids, and then focus on what other like components that you can build that are very generic, such as buttons and links that are absolutely crucial to a UI, and try to lean on other people who have done this before. That's something I did honestly at first when we were building the design system. I think I reached out to like 7 different people who had built a design system before and really just talked to them. Lucky for me, they were very willing to share their experiences, and they, shared some pro tips with me as well that kind of helped us get started. So if you're feeling depressed and like you don't have a lot of resources, try to lean on what's already out there and existing.
Good. Very good suggestions. Thank you. And a bit, like insider information, if you can share it. Can you tell us how many of IBM products actually use Carbon Design System?
I don't think I'm going to share numbers, but we're starting to see it spread across multiple products within IBM, which is really exciting.
That's great. And on your team, how often do you guys push updates?
So it depends. We ship our website every 2 weeks, and that can include something small as like a content fix or adding a new image to the website or something. With our component library, I think it's like every day, like we're fixing bugs. So it's small incremental releases like that we can get out the door right away. For our sketch kit, it depends again. It's probably, if we have a high volume of things that are changing that we need to, like say for example, we release 2 new components, then we definitely make sure that we get the design kit out the door around the same time so that designers can start using those elements as well. So yeah, it really depends. But for breaking changes, we try to promise at least 6 months between each big release.
Wow. Great. And I know you started this process with doing a product audit. How often do you perform design audits?
A lot. That's one of my favorite things to do, honestly, is just like getting an overview of the land and like a lay of the land and kind of understanding where things lie within your system. So we've done content audits, we've done color palette audits, we've done hover audits. Anything, I feel like an audit starts when you're like starting to think of like, maybe we need to change something, or I don't really understand the intricacies of how this works across the system. So that's when you say, it's probably time to perform an audit to get a greater understanding of how everything's being used.
Okay, great. And something that seems to be a very popular discussion topic these days, how do you bridge the gap between the design resources and working in Sketch and code and working with the dev team and engineers?
Yeah, honestly, we haven't utilized a lot of the tooling that's out there, and I think that's because we have such a great process in place right now, and we don't want to fix what's not broken, if that makes sense. So luckily, our developers are very much willing to sit with us, pair design, and work to get something up to the level that our designers expect it to be. And a lot of our developers actually have a design eye, so they can kind of know if something looks off and they're able to fix it. I think tooling a lot of times can help fix that bridge if you don't have people as familiar with design, but a lot of the times, honestly, like a face-to-face conversation about something is way easier to accomplish something rather than like trying to implement a tool to fix it for you. So for us, our methodology on Carbon is really just like, let's have code critiques, let's have design reviews, like let's share out what we're working on and work together to make things the best that they can be.
Okay, great. So we have time for probably 2, maybe 3 more questions. And in terms of measuring success, do you have any tips or specific measurements, data, or research tactics that you can share with us?
Yes, so highly recommend that you set a process in place for tracking your adoption rates or just any way to measure success, try and do that early on, because that's something we had to go back and say, yeah, we really don't have a generalized view of our teams that are utilizing the system. So there's a few different ways that we track things, but I would just say that to make sure that you set those processes in place super early on so that you can have a great idea of who the teams that are using your system are.
Okay. That's wonderful. And in terms of advice for our users, how would you advocate for using a design system over something like Bootstrap? How would you compare a framework to a design system? Sounds like some people are having a hard time convincing their teams to actually get started with design systems.
Sure. So I definitely think you can use Bootstrap or whatever else is out there for inspiration or for learning about how other people have tackled the problems that you're running into. But I think the value in having a design system is it's focused on either the product that you're working on or the company that you work for. It's systematic across those different things so that you can always focus on your company's needs or your product's needs versus Bootstrap, where you may not have the same level of support. I don't necessarily agree with like reinventing the wheel a ton. Like if something's out there and existing, then you should definitely utilize those resources. But the value in a design system really lies in that you're focused on your company's needs, whereas Bootstrap is not. It's very generic. And you're able to kind of create and craft this design system focused on those experiences.
Thank you. So to kind of wrap this up really quickly, what do you see as the next step of Carbon?
Yeah, I see the next steps being us trying to figure out how to continue to maintain it, but also, well, I feel like we figured that out. We figured out the maintaining part, but now it's like, how can we continue to build off this big foundation of a design system and continue to grow it, continue to evolve it, continue to innovate within our system. I'm really interested in how we can use the design system website and enhance the experience, perhaps add some tooling to that to really help enhance a user's experience with our first touch point that they're interacting with. I'm interested in like the visual exploration and evolution of Carbon, like how does it look a year from now or 2 years from now? And then there's a lot of different things that we're implementing right now to try and scale the system. So Salesforce has done an amazing job with their design tokens. And so we're looking at how we can do the same thing across our system so that any team can basically use Carbon, but make their own look and feel to things. So there's a lot coming up that I'm really excited about.
Sounds great. We're definitely looking forward to finding out more in the future. So I think this was the last question. Thank you so much for taking the time and share your experience and knowledge with us. And we do have another session coming up at 11:45. For those of you out there interested in learning more about UXPin, that will be a demo of our product. So definitely join in, and we hope to see you there. Thanks again, Bethany.
Thanks for joining, everyone.